Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk about should I sell my home? Now, this is not a decision I'm planning to make like in the near future, but I've just been thinking about it that should I sell my home over the next few years? And my primary reason for considering that is, because it could free up some money to go do other things like travel more or have more experiences, things like that. I am blessed that I can afford to stay in my home. I don't have to sell. But if I sold it, there is the potential that it could, free up money to do some other things. And the second reason I've thought about it is that, maintaining a home can be a lot of work and, expense and just, selling it could, take that burden off of me as well, just the burden of, the time and energy and effort and so much that goes into maintaining a home. And so, I'd love to hear from you and hear if you've retired and you are, made some kind of change like that and sold your home, or are you thinking about it, in the near future, and why are you thinking about it and what are you thinking about doing? I'd love to hear from you. I know some people decide to move in, with family and, to lower cost, to be, to have, more interaction with your immediate family and everything. That's not an option for me. But I applaud those, who do. And I have thought of, 4 potential options for myself, though, both having pros and cons. But I thought I'd walk through those with you. The first, of course, is I could sell my home and move to a less expensive area. Where I currently live, the cost of living is pretty expensive. Real estate especially, is very expensive. So just selling my current home and downsizing to a less expensive home in my current area really isn't an option. I really couldn't get anything in an area, that I would feel safe and comfortable for less than what I'm currently paying, so moving to a less expensive area is, could be a possibility. The downside to that is, of course, I would be leaving behind the friends and all that I've made, where I currently live, and, who knows whether or not I would like that new place. The second possibility would be buying a tiny home. Now, again, this would also involve moving, most likely. There are no like tiny home communities or anything like that in the area that I live. And because I live in the Southeast and not too far from the coast, we do have that potential for hurricanes. So I don't know that it's really the best environment for a tiny home type situation. So, again, something to think about, but I probably would have to move at least somewhat outside of the area that I'm at. So again, that would mean, moving away from friends. Of course, the other thing is that is something that I would want to kind of try before I buy, because I've never lived in a tiny home. I feel like I could adapt and would be comfortable downsizing enough to do that. But I would probably want to like rent a tiny home Airbnb or something like that for a few weeks to try it out to see. And then I'd have to determine, can I fit everything I would want to keep in the tiny home, or would I still need to buy, pay for storage of some sort. The other thing I understand with regard to tiny homes is, as far as from the cost and all, if I sold my home, I could potentially pay cash for a tiny home. So potentially get rid of a mortgage or have a much, much smaller mortgage. But I understand too, unless you also have your own land to put your tiny home on, then in most cases you end up, living in a tiny home village of sorts, and then you have to pay, you may own your home, but you have to pay like an HOA dues as such or something similar in order to rent the space where you park your tiny home. And that my understanding is that also like pays for things like trash pickup and different things like that in the community. But there's also a cost that comes with that. So, again, of course, if you owned a tiny home, you would still have, the maintenance and those kinds of things to deal, but a much smaller space to maintain as well. So again, just something I've thrown out there as one possibility, that I could have going forward. Number 3 is a camper van. You've probably all seen lots of videos all over YouTube and everything about van life and such. Now, this is something that, again, if I sold my home and bought a used camper van, I would say I could potentially pay cash for that. If I bought one of the new top of the line, completely decked out, don't know that I could pay cash for that. But but potentially pay cash and get rid of a mortgage and have that. The positives, I would say, is, the sense of adventure. And, kind of being able to just the freedom to explore. And I don't have any, qualms about being on the road by myself and that kind of thing. So that kind of sense of adventure appeals to me. I do, however, on the con side, I don't see that being a forever option for me. I could see enjoying that for several years. Again, it's something I'd want to try before I buy kind of thing, but I could see myself enjoying that for a number of years. But I do see somewhere down the road where I would either want or possibly need a brick and mortar type home again. And so, it probably wouldn't be a forever thing, but could be a possibility, of something, at least for a few years. I guess other cons to van life would be, of course, you get rid of, dealing with home maintenance, but then, if you're, in a van and driving around all the time, you're going to have lots, periodic maintenance, on your van that you have to deal with, the possibility of getting stranded somewhere. Then there's, of course, the looking for, a new place to park or to camp on a regular basis. And of course, there's the dealing with the gray water and the black water and everything that you use in, living in a van and everything. So, there's also those kinds of cons of that kind of life too. So you'd have to balance the adventure with the realities of living in a van and just maintaining it and dealing with the water and all those kinds of things. So again, but it's something to think about. The 4th thing that I'm keeping on my list, and this is the one that appeals to me, I think, the least overall, but this is selling my home and renting. Now, if renting, in the current area where I live, wouldn't free up any money because rents are as high or higher than my mortgage in the area in which I live. The positive is it would free up the maintenance side of things that, living in an apartment, I wouldn't have to deal, with the maintenance issues. If something breaks, you can just pick up the phone, call the office and, have them take care of it. So it would free up from that perspective, but it definitely would not free up money of any to do anything additional. And then, of course, you have the issues of rents continuing to increase. You have, there's always the possibility of, noisy neighbors living above you or below you. There is the option of renting a home as opposed to like living in an apartment complex. But my concern about that is, you may sign a lease for 1 to 2 years or something like that. But if you're renting an individual home, then those homeowners could decide to sell the home at some point, and then you would have no option but to move. Whereas if you're in an apartment complex, well, renting is what they do. So you could potentially, stay there forever if you wanted to. So anyway, those are the things that have been floating around in my head. Don't know if I'll ever do any of them, but, I've been trying to look at pros and cons and options and, and maybe I'll just stay where I'm at forever. But again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'd love to hear from those of you that have made some kind of change. you know, whether it was to free up money to do other fun things, or like I said, to free up responsibility or whatever. But I'd love to hear, you know, other possibilities, well, that maybe I haven't thought of. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give me a thumbs up, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Thanks. Bye.